This is the start of a series of videos about Arduino programming, and specifically this is going to be for the Arduino Nano, which is a much smaller version of the Arduino, and it packs a pretty powerful punch despite its size. So we're going to use that because it's small, it's cheap, it's only about $10 or $15 depending on where you get it, and it's available on Amazon and a host of other sites. So before we even get into the hardware portion of the Nano, we need to understand our development environment. So part of this series is going to be actually two tracks. One track is the software track, and the other track will be the hardware track, which will pull in software as needed. It's important to understand that all boards, such as the Arduino, need to be programmed by someone, and the Arduino IDE, or Integrated Development Environment as they call it, is where we do that. Now there's other ways you can do it, but this is by far the easiest and the simplest way to do it. So on my screen here I have the IDE up and running, and there's not much to it. After the install, which is also quite simple, if you have a Chromebook, you can actually install a Chrome version of the IDE. I believe it's called Chromeduino. Sorry, I can't say it. And you can install that, or you can install Arduino IDE from the Arduino website at www.arduino.cc. So here it is. There's just a few. This is running on a Mac, but it can run on Windows as well, and also on a Linux platform. Here it is. We have all the standard menus. We have a set of preferences. We have some file options, some edit options, which are pretty standard for just a simple text editor. And then we have this sketch menu, which we will get into in a later episode, and tools, which you'll find to be probably one of the most important menus on the list of menus here. So just going through this briefly, the tools is important because this is what handles the hardware interface. And so when you plug in your Arduino to your computer to actually upload code that you've written in this IDE that we're looking at, you actually need to set certain things. So first of all, you need to tell it which Arduino you're using. And you can see from this list that there's several that are pre-installed. We'll be using the Nano, but depending on what type of Nano you get and where you get it from, you may actually have to install a hybrid version of this, so some other variation of the Arduino Nano. So it's really important to read the specs on the board that you get to make sure you're installing all the right things. The second thing is the port. I don't have my port set up at the moment here, but you should see an option for a USB port here, either above or below this Bluetooth. You can get the board info if it's plugged in and it's communicating properly, because if these two are set properly, you can actually grab the board info there. And your programmer should be set to AVRISP MKLL, and we'll get into that in a later episode. The other important thing here is the serial monitor, which we'll get into when we actually start running code, but you can actually have the board communicate back with the software and vice versa, so that you can watch that communication through the serial monitor. And we'll have a lesson on that at a later date. So if you look at the actual place that you do the programming, it's right here. I've loaded a sample program that comes with the software, with the IDE, and you can get to that by just going to File, and then you'll see some things here. One is Examples, and if you go to Examples in Basics, you'll see that there's a blink option here, and that's the one that we're looking at on the screen right now. You can see there's a lot of examples that you can download and start with, and those examples are really helpful because it saves you some time, and it helps you to understand and learn how to use things like sensors, servos, regular motors, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of fun to play around with. And where you get your sensors or your board, they may actually have additional samples that you can load into your IDE. So if we look at the code, this is it. So these things here in light gray, which now just turned yellow, those are called comments. So basically a comment is something that you can see, but when the computer actually tries to run whatever it is you've coded, it doesn't look at that stuff. It says, okay, skip over that. That's a comment. We don't need to worry about that as a computer. But as a person, you may want this to help other people understand what it is you did. So in this case, they have some, a little description of what this particular program does. And then they put some additional information there, as well as a link to the Arduino website, because this was actually written by the Arduino folks themselves. That's one way to comment, is with this /* and */ to end the comment. Another way to comment is to use 2 // right next to each other. That's now if I put a space in between those, it's no longer a comment. So it's really important that you not have a space in between them, and you can see how the color changes when I do that, and see how certain words it thinks are what we call keywords, which are special words in a programming language that mean something very specific. For example, in this programming language, in C, in this environment, setup actually has a meaning. In this environment, void has a meaning. High has a meaning. Those are colored because they have a very special meaning in this environment. When we read through this code, there's 2 parts to an Arduino program, typically 2 major parts anyway. One is a part called setup. The second part is called loop. And basically all that says is, take my board, set everything up to be ready to do whatever it is you're programming it to do. So initialize pins, or set certain things to high or low, or whatever, open a port, or whatever the case might be. That's where you would put it in the setup. The loop is what happens from the time setup finishes to the end to whenever you unplug it or tell it to stop. It's called loop because it loops on forever and ever. So basically what this particular loop does is it does this thing called a digital write, and then it waits, and then it does another write, and then it waits again. And the ultimately what this does is it turns a blinking light, or it turns a light on and off to make it blink. So this line of code says write high, or put some power onto pin 13 of my Arduino, which is probably hooked up in some way ultimately to an LED. So light the LED up, wait for a second, 1,000 is a second, and then shut it off. So set it to low, and then wait another second and do it all over again. So it just keeps looping over and over and over again. And all Arduino programs have these 2 pieces always in them. So anyway, that's kind of the intro to what an Arduino program looks like in an IDE. Lastly, I forgot to mention is the serial monitor, which you can get to here. Because we don't have any connection here, we won't be able to see it. Down here, you'll see, if you have any errors, you'll see these errors down on the bottom here. In the next episode, we'll actually connect something to the computer so we can see exactly how the connections are made and what it looks like when it is connected. That's it for now.